My name is Noah Millington. My project is Telstar, the satellite that changed the world. Many great thinkers around the world were using their knowledge to try to create technology that help bring people understanding by communicating over vast distances. They knew that without communication and understanding that there could be another world war, this time with nuclear weapons. Telstar was intended to increase communication and understanding between nations. It did do this and so much more. The time is in the late 1940s. Television sets are beginning to appear in many American households because they are becoming cheaper. The Cold War is growing because of the ideological and geopolitical struggle for global influence. It was called the Cold War because the two superpowers, the Soviet Union and the United States, did not go head-to-head to battle. Instead, they supported different proxies, such as my Olympic team versus your Olympic team, or my space agency versus your space agency. The two superpowers at the time, the Soviet Union and the United States, also both got their technology for rockets from the Nazis after World War II. Those same two superpowers were also using their technology in different ways. The United States was using their technology for science, research, and well-being for others, while the Soviet Union was using the missile technology for military reasons and would continue to do so, like their premier said, at almost all costs. After the Soviet Union sent up Sputnik 1 in 1957, that struck fear into the Americans' hearts. The reason for this was because the Soviet Union had used one of their intercontinental ballistic missiles to send the satellite into space. That showed that this one type of technology could easily be turned into something else, such as a weapon of mass destruction that was extremely fast and far-ranged. The Soviet Union had set a fast pace for space exploration. The way that people communicated during this period was through telegraph, phone, mail, and radio and television. Broadcast signals could only be truly live over short distances. The reason why distance was a problem was that light cannot curve. It only goes in a straight line. The country was not dotted with enough towers to send signals from city to city. Also, most TV programs were distributed by mail, typically several days after recording. Despite these limitations, people still wanted to communicate over vast distances in real time. Also, since most of our planet is covered in water, constructing towers wouldn't have worked. In order to send signals from the US to Europe, they would have had to build a 475-mile-high tower, which is beyond even modern capabilities. But there were many great thinkers working on enhancing communication over vast distances. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union was far ahead than any other country in the space race. Their premier took every chance he could to contrast his country's accomplishments with the Americans' failures. Speaking 3 days after successfully launching their second satellite into orbit in 1957, Premier Khrushchev responded to the Americans naming their satellite program Vanguard. The name alone suggested that they expected to be first, but the Soviet Union was first. Now our Sputniks are going around and around the world, waiting for the American Sputniks to come up and join them. The world was on edge. One of America's great thinkers was John Robinson Pierce. Born March 27, 1910, in Des Moines, Iowa, he was an only child of John Starr Pierce and Harriet Ann Pierce. His father was frequently away from home for weeks at a time as a salesman. After living with his mother and being exposed to many technical problems and being taught how to fix them, he, later on, went to say, "I wished that I could be a writer, but I thought it would be more practical to be an engineer." He did become both a technical and science fiction writer, but he was also an engineer. Dr. Pierce is credited with coming up with the idea of unmanned communication satellites in a story he wrote in 1952, published in Astounding Science Fiction magazine. In an interview, Dr. Pierce said, "To my mind, satellites came from 3 sources: from an interest in space engendered by science fiction, from actual space activities, and from an interest in communication. In 1936, John Robinson Pierce was hired by Bell Labs. Bell Labs offered the opportunity to bring Dr. Pierce's science fiction stories to life by creating an active satellite to receive, amplify, then relay signals over vast distances. This satellite's name was Telstar. The way that Telstar worked was that it would receive a signal that had been weakened 1,000,000 billion times. Since the signal was so weak, Telstar had to have a really strong receiver in order to pick up the signal. Once it did pick up the signal, it would amplify the signal again tens of billions of times, then send it back to the receiver. The transmitters and receivers at the time were giant 7-story high horn antennas enclosed in a radome to protect it from the weather. On Telstar's 6th orbit around the Earth, its mission began. The Vice President of the United States, who was located in Washington, received a phone call from the chairman of AT&T, who was in Andover, Maine, live. 2 weeks later, President John F. Kennedy's press conference was relayed to France, Great Britain, and America as hundreds of millions of viewers watched. Good afternoon. I understand the part of today's press conference is being relayed by the Telstar communications satellite to viewers across the Atlantic, and this is another indication of the extraordinary world in which we live. This satellite must be high enough to carry signals from both sides of the world, which is, of course, a very essential requirement for peace. And I think this understanding, which will inevitably come from the speedier communications, is bound to increase the security of all people, here and those across the oceans. So we're glad to participate in this operation, developed by private industry, launched by government, in admirable cooperation. The barrier of live television over vast distances had just been broken. In November 1962, the same year it was launched, Telstar suddenly refused to take commands. The reason for this was because of a thermonuclear bomb test called Starfish Prime conducted by the U.S. in high altitude a day before it was launched. The radiation caused some of Telstar circuits to be fried. It stayed like this for a couple of weeks before the technicians at Bell Labs used a code to get it to receive commands. In February 1963, it was completely silenced, and there was nothing that could be done to get it back online. Although Telstar went offline, that doesn't mean that it stopped orbiting around the Earth. Even now, as you listen to this, Telstar 1 is still orbiting around the Earth. Telstar increased communications between governments, connected more people, and was hoped to increase communication and understanding as to reduce the likelihood of an all-out nuclear war. Additionally, it caught the attention of the public. The Pope told the pilgrims in Rome that Telstar had helped strengthen brotherhood among peoples and helped mark its new stage of peaceful progress. When Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson visited the Pope, he brought him a model of Telstar as a present because he had shown immense interest in it. An inspiration because of Telstar is, believe it or not, a soccer ball. Since Telstar had a white body, had black solar panels, and had a roughly spherical shape, it could have looked like a soccer ball. It since inspired Adidas to create a soccer ball with a black and white pattern to match Telstar. Do you remember this? It's the Death Star from Star Wars. As you can see, the laser looks like one of the mirrors on Telstar, and the rest looks like the solar panels. Dr. Pierce's science fiction story was brought to life by Telstar, and Telstar inspired one of the greatest science fiction franchises in the world. Telstar is the reason we have global connectivity nowadays. From global monitoring satellites to recon satellites to simple relay satellites, they were all sent up for the same purpose, to help humanity to understand each other. Without being able to understand one another, there would constantly be war among humanity, and so many would die. But with communication and understanding, we can achieve anything.